My boss vanished after claiming his sister had terminal cancer. Everyone felt sorry for him. Until I found him speaking at a conference for our biggest competitor. Then IT discovered missing client files. Legal got involved. And the entire company realized the family tragedy was a lie. The first sign that something was wrong was not the empty office. It was the cake. A cheap supermarket cake sitting in the middle of the conference table at 9 in the morning, still inside its plastic container, with the words, "Thinking of you, Daniel," written in blue icing across the top. Nobody touched it. Nobody even looked directly at it. We all just stood around that table with paper cups of coffee in our hands, pretending this was a normal thing. Pretending our senior operations director had suddenly disappeared for a week, flown back to Singapore because his sister was dying. And somehow the correct corporate response was a cake no one had asked for. I remember staring at the icing until the letters started to blur. "Thinking of you, Daniel." That was what the cake said. But by then, Daniel was not thinking of us. He was already working somewhere else. Of course, I did not know that yet. None of us did. At that point, all we knew was what HR had told us. Daniel Lim, the most controlled, prepared, almost annoyingly professional man in our London office, had been forced to take emergency leave. His sister, we were told, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. There was a niece involved. No parents left. A messy divorce. A family emergency so painful and private that we were asked not to contact him unless absolutely necessary. And we believed it. Why wouldn't we? Daniel was not the type of person you questioned. He had worked at Bellwether and Company for nearly 6 years. He wore press shirts even on casual Fridays. He remembered client birthdays. He used phrases like, "Let's pressure test that," and "I'll circle back with a clean answer," in a way that somehow made people trust him. He was the kind of man senior leadership loved because he made chaos look calm. And we were in chaos all the time. Bellwether was not a huge company, but it liked to act like one. We handled supply chain consulting for retail brands, mostly mid-sized companies that wanted to sound bigger than they were. My job was client delivery manager, which meant I lived in the space between what sales promised and what operations could actually do. A terrible space. The space where everyone smiled on calls and then screamed quietly into spreadsheets afterward. Daniel sat above our team, close enough to know every detail, far enough to avoid most blame. He was not warm exactly, but he was useful. If a client escalated, Daniel could calm them down. If finance delayed a budget approval, Daniel could get it moving. If someone from the board asked why a project was slipping, Daniel could turn a disaster into a timeline recalibration with one email. People respected him. Some people feared him. I did both. My name is Ethan Carter, 34 years old, permanently exhausted, and somehow still the guy everybody called when things started collapsing. I'd worked at Bellwether for almost 9 years. Long enough to know which executives disappeared when clients got angry. Long enough to know which deadlines were real and which were just threats wrapped in PowerPoint presentations. Long enough to understand that corporate loyalty was mostly a performance people acted out until budgets tightened. Officially, I was a client delivery manager. Unofficially, I was the person who cleaned up disasters after leadership promised impossible things. That became my identity inside the company. Reliable Ethan. Steady Ethan. The guy who would stay online until midnight rebuilding transition plans while directors slept peacefully knowing someone else would absorb the damage. I wasn't charismatic enough for executive leadership and not political enough for management culture. I didn't dominate meetings. I didn't network at golf weekends. I didn't know how to turn basic competence into personal branding. I just fixed things. And Bellwether quietly depended on people like me. People who absorbed pressure without making noise. People who became too useful to fire, but never important enough to protect. At 34, I already felt older than I should have. Too many late nights. Too many client emergencies answered from train stations. Airport lounges. Tiny kitchens at 1 in the morning. My university friends had moved on into stable lives while I somehow became emotionally tethered to operational crisis management. Bellwether had a way of flattening people into functions, and Daniel understood that better than anyone. I worked under him for 3 years. Some people loved him. Some people feared him. I mostly admired him in the beginning. That's the embarrassing part. Because Daniel had this way of making you feel chosen. He'd lean against your desk late at night while everyone else had gone home and say things like, "Ethan, you're the only person I trust to untangle this." And I would untangle it. Because that was my weakness. I liked being needed, even when it cost me sleep, weekends, and any remaining faith in workplace boundaries. The week before Daniel vanished, we were preparing for our biggest client transition of the year. A luxury department store group called Harrington Vale had signed a massive 12-month contract with us. 7 figures. Board visibility. The kind of account that made directors suddenly appear in meetings they had ignored for months. Daniel had led the pitch. I had built the actual transition plan. That was how things usually worked. He spoke in clean sentences. I cleaned up the mess behind them. The project was supposed to go live the following Monday. We had supplier data, warehouse schedules, vendor contacts, inventory risk reports, pricing models, and a terrifying number of documents sitting inside our shared drive. If the transition went smoothly, Daniel would probably get promoted. If it failed, people like me would be asked why execution had not matched expectations. So when Daniel did not show up on Tuesday morning, it was strange. When he missed the 10 a.m. client prep call, it was stranger. When his assistant, Maya, said she had not heard from him either, the whole floor changed temperature. At first, people joked. Maybe he finally took a holiday, someone said. Daniel? He probably schedules his own sleep in 15-minute blocks. He'll appear at noon with 3 espressos and a reason why we're all wrong. But noon came. Then 3. Then the end of the day. No Daniel. His Slack status stayed gray. His phone went straight to voicemail. His calendar still showed meetings. But he did not join any of them. By Wednesday, people stopped joking. Maya looked pale. She kept refreshing her inbox like an answer might appear if she clicked hard enough. Our head of HR, Paula, walked in and out of glass meeting rooms with her jaw tight. Marcus, the managing partner, arrived before lunch and shut himself in his office for 2 hours. That never happened. Marcus usually arrived late, laughed loudly, and asked somebody else to summarize anything important. By Thursday, the rumors had become their own department. Someone said Daniel had been fired. Someone else said he had burned out. Someone whispered that he had been caught manipulating expenses. Another person claimed he was in hospital. I tried not to listen, but offices are designed for listening. Even when people lower their voices, the glass walls carry everything. Little pieces of fear drifted through the air and landed on everyone's desks. Then Friday morning came. The emergency all-hands meeting. No agenda, just a calendar invite titled Team Update. That was when we got the story. Paula stood at the front of the room beside Marcus, holding a folder she never opened. Marcus did most of the talking, which was how I knew the company wanted us to feel something. Daniel is dealing with a serious family situation, he said. His voice was lower than usual. He has returned to Singapore to support his sister, who has received a terminal diagnosis. This is sudden, deeply personal, and obviously extremely difficult for him and his family. A silence fell over the room. Marcus continued. Daniel has asked for privacy. He has specifically requested that people do not contact him unless there is a business-critical reason. He does not know when he will return. Maya covered her mouth. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God." I felt my stomach drop. Because whatever complicated feelings I had about Daniel, that was awful, truly awful. I thought about his sister, his niece, the way he must have packed a bag in panic, caught the first flight out, left everything behind. I felt guilty for every suspicious thought I had entertained over the past few days. After the meeting, nobody knew what to do with themselves. People spoke softly. Work continued, because work always continues. But it had a strange funeral energy to it. By lunch, someone from HR ordered the cake. Thinking of you, Daniel. It sat there all afternoon. The next week was worse. Not emotionally, operationally, because Daniel had vanished in the middle of Harrington Vale. And suddenly everyone realized how much he had kept inside his own head. Passwords were missing. Vendor notes were incomplete. Client agreements had been discussed verbally and never documented. There were side commitments buried in email threads none of us could access. Harrington Vale kept asking questions that began with, "Daniel said," and ended with all of us staring blankly at each other. Daniel said the warehouse risk model would be ready. Daniel said the vendor onboarding could be moved up. Daniel said Bellwether had already reviewed the penalty clauses. And Daniel was gone. At first, I defended him. He was probably pulled away suddenly. I told the team, we just need to reconstruct what we can. So I reconstructed it. Late nights, early mornings, Calls with suppliers who sounded annoyed that Daniel had not briefed anyone. Emails to Harrington Vale, carefully worded to avoid admitting we were missing half the context. Meetings with Marcus where he nodded like a concerned leader and then gave me 3 more impossible tasks. "You're steady, Ethan," he said one evening, standing beside my desk while everyone else packed up. "That's why Daniel relied on you." I almost laughed. Relied on me. That was one way to say dumped everything on me without giving me authority. Still, I did it. Because the client mattered. Because my team was drowning. Because Maya looked like she might cry every time Daniel's name came up. Because I thought we were all trying to protect someone who was going through the worst moment of his life. A month passed. Daniel did not come back. He replied to exactly 2 emails. Both were short. "Please proceed as you think best." And later, "I'm not in a position to discuss work matters right now." That was it. No detail. No update. No apology for leaving us with a half-built transition plan and a client who had begun to notice cracks. People were understanding at first, then quietly confused, then irritated in the way people become irritated when sympathy has nowhere to go. "I know he's dealing with a lot," Maya said one afternoon, sitting across from me in the break room, stirring tea she had not drunk. But I sent him one message. Just one. Not about work. Just asking if he was okay. He read it and didn't answer. "Maybe he can't." I said, I know that. But still." She looked embarrassed for wanting a reply. I understood. Grief does not have good manners. Crisis does not send updates. But Daniel had worked with these people for years. He had eaten birthday cake with us, complained about trains with us, stayed late before client launches with us. His silence felt too clean, too complete, like a door shut from the other side. The official announcement came 6 weeks after he disappeared. Another all hands. This time, Marcus did not lower his voice as much. "Daniel has made the difficult decision to remain in Singapore permanently," he said. "Given the needs of his family, he will not be returning to Bellwether." A few people nodded sadly. Maya stared at the floor. I felt something twist in my chest. Not grief exactly. Not anger either. Something closer to unease. Because Daniel leaving made sense. And somehow, it didn't. He had a flat in London. A team. A role. A whole life. He had spent years building himself into the kind of person who did not leave loose ends. Yet now we were told he was staying in Singapore forever. Effective immediately. With no farewell call. No proper handover. No personal message beyond a short statement forwarded by HR. It was possible. Of course it was possible. Family emergencies change people. But that small, uneasy feeling stayed with me. It stayed when Marcus announced that I would be temporarily absorbing part of Daniel's responsibilities. It stayed when Harrington Vale pushed back on 3 deliverables Daniel had promised but never documented. It stayed when I found a folder in the shared drive labeled HV Final Strategy Dilemma that had been emptied. Not deleted. Emptied. The folder was still there. The contents were gone. I asked IT about it. They said the files had been moved before Daniel's leave started. Moved where? I asked. The IT analyst, Ravi, squinted at his screen. Personal archive. Looks like. Can we access it? Not without approval. From who? He glanced up at me. Daniel was the owner. I sat very still. A personal archive was not unusual for drafts. But for final strategy documents? For a live client transition? That was not normal. I told myself there was probably an explanation. Then the first real crack appeared. It happened because of a LinkedIn post. Not Daniel's. He was too careful for that. It was from a woman named Priya Nair, an old Bellwether consultant who had moved to Singapore 2 years earlier. I barely knew her. We had worked together on one project, exchanged a few polite messages, then became the kind of LinkedIn connections who occasionally liked each other's promotions and ignored everything else. Her post showed a conference stage in Singapore. Bright lights, corporate backdrop, a panel about retail logistics in Southeast Asia. And there, sitting at the far end of the panel, wearing a navy suit and that same controlled expression, was Daniel. Not at a hospital, not quietly caring for his niece, not hidden away in family tragedy. Daniel, on a panel, beside the regional director of North Star Meridian, our rival. At first, I thought it was an old photo. It had to be. I zoomed in. The post was dated that morning. The caption read, "Great insights today from leaders shaping the future of retail operations across APAC." Daniel's name was not tagged, But his face was there, clear as day. My pulse started beating in my ears. I clicked through the comments. Nothing obvious. A few congratulations. A few clapping emojis. Someone from North Star wrote, "Excited for what's ahead." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Excited for what's ahead. I should have closed the app. I should have taken a breath. Instead, I messaged Priya. "Hey, random question. Is that Daniel Lim from Bellwether in your panel photo?" She replied 20 minutes later. "Yeah, you know him? He just joined North Star here. Small world." I read the message once. Then again. Then a third time. "Just joined North Star here." My hands went cold. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. "Joined. As an employed there?" Priya replied with a laughing emoji. "Yes. Senior strategy role, I think. Started a few weeks ago. Big hire for them. A few weeks ago. Not after months of family crisis. Not after a long leave. A few weeks ago. I sat at my desk surrounded by the normal sounds of the office. Keyboards. Phones. Someone laughing too loudly near the printers. Maya asking someone about a client file. The coffee machine grinding beans like nothing had changed. But something had changed. Everything had changed. Because if Priya was right, Daniel had not disappeared because of his sister. He had disappeared because North Star wanted him immediately, and Bellwether had given him paid leave to do it. I did not move for almost a full minute. Then I took screenshots. Of the post. Of Priya's messages. Of the panel photo. Of the comment from North Star. I saved everything into a folder on my desktop and named it Singapore. My heart was racing now, but my thoughts were strangely clear. There were two possibilities. 1. Priya had misunderstood. 2. Daniel had lied to the entire company about a terminally ill sister so he could skip his notice period and start working for a competitor while still technically employed by us. And if the second possibility was true, then Harrington Vale was not just a messy project. It was a crime scene with spreadsheets. Because Daniel had removed files. Daniel had controlled client information. Daniel had made undocumented promises. And North Star had suddenly hired him into a senior strategy role in the exact market where Harrington Vale wanted to expand next year. I felt sick. Not because Daniel had left. People leave jobs. People burn out. People jump ship. But this was different. This was using a dying woman as a cover story. Maybe a woman who did not even exist. I looked across the office at Maya. She was at her desk, wearing headphones, typing quickly. She had spent weeks feeling guilty because Daniel had ignored her message. She had collected money for flowers that HR never sent because they couldn't confirm an address. She had cried in the bathroom after the announcement that he was staying in Singapore. And he had been on a conference stage, talking about retail operations. I stood up too fast. My chair rolled backward and hit the cabinet behind me. Maya looked up. "You okay?" she asked. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. Because I knew, in that moment, that once I said it, there would be no putting it back. So I forced a smile. "Yeah," I said. "Just need to check something." Then I walked straight to Ravi in IT. He was eating crisps at his desk and watching a loading bar crawl across his monitor. "Can you pull access logs for Daniel's archive?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "Why?" "I need to know what files were moved before his leave." "Ethan." "Ravi. Please." He studied my face. Whatever he saw there made him put the crisps down. "I can't just pull that without a ticket." "So open a ticket." "Approved by." I looked toward Marcus's glass office. Then back at Ravi. "Me. For Harrington Vale continuity." He hesitated. "That's thin." "I know." Another pause. Then he sighed. "Give me 10 minutes." Those 10 minutes felt longer than the 6 weeks before them. I went back to my desk and tried to look normal. I answered 2 emails. I joined a client call and said words I could not remember afterward. I watched the little green light beside Ravi's name go from active to away to active again. Then he messaged me. "Meeting room 4. Now." I walked there calmly. Or at least I tried to. Ravi was already inside with his laptop open. Blinds half closed. "That folder was moved to Daniel's personal archive 2 days before he left," he said. "Which files?" He turned the laptop toward me. My throat tightened. The list was long. Harrington Vale pricing model. Supplier transition map. Penalty exposure analysis. APAC expansion notes. Vendor risk ranking. Internal negotiation strategy. And one file titled North Star comparison draft. I pointed at it. "What is that?" Ravi clicked. "Access denied." He tried again. Access denied. Encrypted, he said. By Daniel? Looks like it. I felt my anger settle into something hard and quiet. Can you see if anything was exported? Ravi did not answer right away. That was answer enough. Ravi. He rubbed his forehead. There were downloads. How many? A lot. When? He looked at me. The night before he disappeared. For a second, neither of us spoke. The office noise outside the room sounded far away now, like we were underwater. Then Ravi said the thing I had already started to fear. Ethan, if he took this to North Star, this is bigger than HR. I nodded slowly. I know. My phone buzzed on the table. An email notification. From Marcus. Subject, Harrington Vale escalation prep. I almost laughed. Because of course the fire had waited until now to spread. I opened the email. Ethan, need you in the boardroom at 3. Harrington Vale has concerns about strategic overlap with North Star Meridian. Daniel's name came up. We need a clean explanation. A clean explanation. That was what everyone always wanted. A clean explanation for messy people. I looked at Ravi's screen again. The downloads. The deleted folder. The conference photo. The messages from Priya. The cake no one ate. Thinking of you. Daniel. I finally understood the joke. It had been on us the whole time. I did not answer Marcus right away. I just sat there in meeting room 4, with Ravi's laptop still open between us, staring at the access logs like they might rearrange themselves into something less ugly. But they didn't. The timestamps were clean. Too clean. Downloads at 11:48 p.m. Multiple exports. Large file transfers. Then silence. Then Daniel vanished the next morning and suddenly became the grieving brother nobody was allowed to question. Ravi leaned back in his chair slowly. You need to be careful with this. Why? Because if you're right, this touches legal, clients, compliance, probably the board. And if leadership already knows something, he stopped himself there. I looked at him. You think Marcus knows? I think executives usually know more than they admit. That sentence stayed in my head longer than it should have. Executives usually know more than they admit. Because suddenly the timeline felt strange in ways I had ignored before. The emergency leave had been approved almost instantly. No resistance. No transition planning. No formal handover. No request for medical documentation. At least none that HR ever mentioned. They had simply accepted the story and wrapped it in corporate sympathy before anyone could ask questions. Maybe because they believed him. Or maybe because they needed to. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Need you upstairs in 10. No greeting. No punctuation. Just pressure. I stood up. Can you send me those logs? Ravi hesitated. Officially, no. Just send them. That could get me fired. I looked at him quietly. Ravi, if this blows up, all of us are getting dragged into it anyway. He stared at the screen for another second, then nodded once. Check your personal email in 5 minutes. I walked out of the room, trying to keep my breathing steady. The office looked normal. That was the disturbing part. People still carried coffees around. Someone near sales was laughing at something on their monitor. Maya was arguing softly with a client on Teams. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead like always. But underneath it, I could feel something shifting. Like the building itself knew a crack had formed somewhere deep in the foundation. The boardroom upstairs smelled like expensive coffee and stress. Marcus was there with Paula from HR and 2 Harrington Vale representatives I recognized from previous transition calls. One of them, Andrew, looked furious in that polished corporate way where people smile while threatening lawsuits. Ethan, Marcus said quickly, thanks for joining. I sat down carefully. Andrew slid a printed document across the table toward us. Maybe you can explain why North Star Meridian presented a restructuring proposal yesterday containing language nearly identical to material developed during our strategy workshops with Bellwether. My stomach tightened. Marcus immediately leaned forward. We're aware of the concern and taking it seriously. Andrew ignored him and looked directly at me. You worked closely with Daniel. Yes. Yes. Did he have access to our APAC expansion planning? Yes. Full access. Yes. The room went very still. Andrew tapped the document. Because this isn't a coincidence. I looked down at the pages. Certain phrases jumped out instantly. Supplier consolidation ladder. Tiered inventory migration. Regional vendor stabilization sequence. Daniel's language. Bellwether structure. My work underneath it all. North Star had not just copied general ideas. They had our framework. Marcus cleared his throat. We don't yet know how North Star developed their materials. Andrew finally looked at him again. Don't insult me. Your former operations director disappears for 6 weeks. Claims a family tragedy. Then appears working for your direct competitor while presenting a strategy suspiciously similar to ours. If confidential planning moved with him, Bellwether is liable. Paula shifted uncomfortably beside him. I could actually see sweat forming near Marcus's collar. And suddenly I realized something else. He was scared. Not defensive. Not angry. Scared. That mattered. Because Marcus was the kind of man who only panicked when his own position became unstable. The second Harrington Vale left the room. Marcus shut the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Paula folded her arms. We need to contain this immediately. Contain. Always contain. Never solve. Never tell the truth. Just contain. Marcus turned to me. Ethan, I need complete honesty here. Did Daniel ever indicate he was speaking to North Star before he left? No. Any unusual behavior? I almost laughed at that. Besides disappearing under a fake cancer story? His jaw tightened. This isn't the time. No. I think it is. Paula jumped in quickly. Ethan, emotions aside. We need facts. Facts. Fine. Daniel moved files into a personal archive 2 days before he disappeared. Marcus froze for half a second. Tiny reaction. Most people would miss it. I didn't. You knew? I asked quietly. I did not know he stole files. That's not what I asked. Silence. Paula looked between us carefully now. Marcus exhaled slowly. Daniel informed me he was considering opportunities in Singapore before he left. There it was. The first real fracture. You knew he might resign? He said he was burned out. But you still told the company his sister was dying. That came from him. And you believed it? Marcus snapped then. What exactly are you implying? That maybe nobody checked because it was convenient. The room went cold. Paula immediately stepped in. Enough. We need to focus on exposure. Exposure. Liability. Risk. Not morality. Not the fact that an entire office had spent weeks grieving for a story that might not even be real. Marcus rubbed both hands over his face. For the first time since I'd known him. He looked old. Daniel was critical to Harrington Vale. We couldn't lose him during transition. I stared at him. There it was again. Another crack. He looked up too late. And suddenly the whole ugly shape of it started forming in my head. Not fully. Not clearly. But enough. Enough to know this was bigger than one man lying to skip his notice period. Because Marcus had known Daniel was considering leaving. Maybe before the emergency leave. Maybe before the fake story. Maybe before the files disappeared. And if that was true, then Bellwether leadership had either ignored massive warning signs or actively helped bury them. Paula stood up abruptly. This conversation stays confidential. I almost smiled. Corporate people always say that right before everything explodes publicly. Marcus pointed toward me. Ethan, you were closest operationally to Daniel. I need you helping us rebuild the Harrington Vale documentation immediately. I looked at him for a long moment. The old version of me would have said yes automatically. The dependable one. The fixer. The woman who stayed late cleaning disasters created by men with bigger salaries and better titles. But something about today had shifted permanently. You need legal. I said calmly. We need both. No. You need someone to clean this before the board realizes how bad it is. Ethan. And honestly, I don't think you even know how bad it is yet. I left before either of them answered. Back downstairs. Maya caught me near the printers. What happened? I hesitated. For 1 second I considered protecting her from it a little longer. Letting her have one more afternoon before the illusion broke apart completely. Then I remembered the flowers she had tried to send to Singapore. Daniel's working at North Star. I said quietly. Her face went blank. What? He never stayed on leave. That's not funny. I'm not joking. She stared at me like her brain physically could not process the sentence. No. No, that's impossible. I have proof. The color drained from her face slowly. What about his sister? I don't know. Oh my God. She sat down hard in the nearest chair. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt genuinely angry. Not stressed. Not overwhelmed. Angry. Because Daniel had not just lied to the company. He had manipulated grief itself. He had used sympathy as a shield because nobody wants to interrogate tragedy. Nobody wants to be the asshole asking for proof when cancer gets mentioned. It was brilliant in a disgusting way. Maya whispered, almost to herself. I defended him. So did I. I cried over this. I didn't answer because honestly. So at half the office. Not openly, but quietly. In bathrooms. On train rides home. During late-night conversations about how awful life could become without warning. And all that time Daniel had apparently been onboarding at North Star. By 4 o'clock the rumors had started moving faster than management could control them. Somebody from finance had seen legal arrive upstairs. Someone else overheard Paula arguing with Marcus in one of the conference rooms. Ravi messaged me a single sentence. Your email attachment might become important soon. I checked my personal inbox again. The logs were there. I downloaded copies immediately. Then my work laptop rang. Daniel. For a second, I genuinely thought about declining. But curiosity won. I answered without speaking. His voice came smooth and calm as ever. Ethan. That almost made me laugh. The normality of it. Like he had simply missed a few meetings instead of detonating the company. You've been busy. I said. A pause. Then. I suppose you know. Depends. Does your sister exist? Silence. Not defensive silence. Measured silence. Daniel always paused before difficult conversations. Like he was editing himself in real time. She exists, he said finally. Is she dying? Another pause. She was sick. That's not what I asked. His voice hardened slightly. You don't understand the situation. No, actually. I think I do. You got an offer from North Star. They wanted you immediately. You didn't want to work your notice period. So you vanished. It wasn't that simple. It never is. He exhaled softly. Marcus knew I was leaving. I know. That seemed to surprise him. Then you know Bellwether was already unstable before I left. The board was preparing cuts. Harrington Vale was overpromised from day one. They needed a miracle transition with half the staffing. Marcus knew it. I knew it. So your solution was stealing files? I didn't steal anything. I nearly lost my temper then. You moved confidential strategy documents into a personal archive before joining a competitor. Ethan, listen to me carefully. Bellwether would have collapsed under Harrington Vale eventually. North Star simply moved faster. What does that even mean? It means the market already knew Bellwether was weak. His tone changed there. Less defensive, more persuasive. The tone he used in client negotiations when he wanted people to stop resisting and accept his version of reality. I gave 6 years to that company, he continued quietly. 6 years of 80-hour weeks while Marcus collected bonuses and the board played politics. The second I became inconvenient, they would have cut me too. So you cut first. Yes. At least he admitted it. I leaned back in my chair, staring out across the office while people pretended to work around me. You know what the worst part is? I asked. What? You could have just resigned. A small laugh escaped him then. Tired. Almost sad. No. Ethan. I couldn't. Why? Because Marcus would never have let me leave cleanly before Harrington Vale stabilized. He would have tied me up in legal threats and transition clauses for months. North Star wanted me immediately. I did what I had to do. And the cancer story? Another silence. Then finally, that part got bigger than I intended. I closed my eyes. Jesus Christ. You let people grieve over a fake dying woman. I never asked anyone to. You let them. His voice dropped lower now. You think Bellwether cared about us? About any of us? They care about revenue. That's it. Maybe. But at least most people there didn't fake terminal illness. That hit him. I could hear it. For the first time, Daniel sounded genuinely irritated. You're simplifying this because it's easier. No. I think you're trying to intellectualize something disgusting. A longer silence this time. Then he said quietly, you should be careful. Ethan. Every nerve in my body sharpened. Is that a threat? No. It's advice. Meaning? Marcus is going to need someone to blame. And operationally, you touched everything. I sat up straighter. What did you just say? You were involved in all Harrington Vale implementation planning. If legal gets involved, Bellwether will protect itself first. You're unbelievable. I'm realistic. No. Daniel, you're a coward. And I hung up. My hands were shaking afterward. Not from fear. From adrenaline. Because underneath all the lies and manipulation, one thing he said felt true. Marcus was absolutely the kind of executive who would sacrifice employees to save himself. And suddenly I understood why he had looked so terrified upstairs. Not because Daniel betrayed Bellwether, because Daniel could expose what Bellwether already was. Around 6:30, the office started emptying out, but leadership remained upstairs. The glass conference room stayed lit. Shadows moved behind frosted windows. Lawyers came and went carrying laptops and takeaway coffees. The atmosphere had become poisonous now. Everyone felt it. Nobody trusted the official story anymore. Maya walked over quietly while I packed my bag. "Are you leaving?" "Soon." She hesitated. "Do you think they knew?" I looked toward the executive floor. "Yes." "How much?" "I don't know yet." That was the truth. I still didn't know where incompetence ended and active cover-up began. But I knew there was more. There had to be. Because people like Marcus didn't improvise emotional narratives that fast unless they were already protecting something. I finally left the office around 7. Outside, London was wet and cold, the sidewalks shining from recent rain. I walked without direction for almost 20 minutes before stopping at a tiny Thai place near Holborn I used to visit during horrible project weeks. The owner recognized me immediately. "Long day." I laughed softly. "You have no idea." I sat near the window with noodles I barely touched while my phone kept vibrating against the table. Messages from work. Client escalations. Maya. Ravi. Then one message from an unknown number. "You should stop digging." I stared at it. No name. No explanation. Just that sentence. Most people would probably panic. Instead, I felt something strange. Confirmation. Because anonymous warnings only happen when somebody's afraid you're close to something real. A second message appeared before I could think further. "Daniel isn't the only one who left with information." My stomach tightened. I typed back immediately. "Who is this?" No reply. I waited. Still nothing. Outside, rain slid slowly down the restaurant window while traffic moved through the city in blurred red streaks. I looked down at the messages again. "Daniel isn't the only one who left with information." That sentence changed everything. Because until now, I thought this story was about one ambitious executive lying his way into a competitor role. But suddenly it felt bigger. Systemic. Like Daniel hadn't broken the machine. Maybe he'd simply escaped it before the rest of us realized it was already on fire. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, another piece of the timeline rearranged itself in my head. Daniel moving files before disappearing. Marcus approving leave suspiciously fast. Harrington Vale suddenly accusing Bellwether of strategic overlap. The anonymous messages. The warning. Daniel isn't the only one who left with information. That line kept looping through my brain like a scratched record. Because if Daniel wasn't the only one, then whatever was happening inside Bellwether had been happening for a long time. Maybe years. And somehow the rest of us had kept showing up every morning pretending we worked at a normal company. I got to the office before 8. The building already felt different. Quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful. Careful. People were speaking softly near reception. HR was everywhere. Even the interns looked nervous. The second I stepped onto the operations floor, Maya walked toward me fast enough that I knew something had happened. "Marcus wants everyone from Harrington Vale in Conference B," she whispered. "Now." What happened? "Legal's here." Of course they were. Conference B was already half full when I arrived. Lawyers in dark suits. Paula from HR. Marcus pacing beside the windows with a phone pressed to his ear. The Harrington Vale account team sat together looking shell-shocked. Ravi was there too, which immediately made my stomach tighten. IT only got dragged into meetings like this when things had become dangerous. Marcus ended his call the second he saw me. "Ethan, sit." No greeting. No fake warmth anymore. Just pressure. I sat slowly. One of the lawyers introduced himself as Martin from external counsel, which translated roughly to "the situation is bad enough they don't trust internal legal anymore." He opened a folder and looked around the room carefully. As of this morning, Bellwether has received notice that Harrington Vale intends to suspend portions of the transition process pending investigation into potential misuse of confidential strategic material. Nobody spoke. Martin continued. "We are also aware that Northstar Meridian has recently onboarded former Bellwether employee Daniel Lim." Again, silence. "At this stage," he said carefully, "we are conducting internal reviews regarding data handling, client confidentiality, and access permissions related to the Harrington Vale account." Internal reviews. Another corporate phrase. Soft words covering something ugly. Marcus folded his arms tightly. "What we need right now is alignment. No speculation. No external discussion. No messages to clients beyond approved communication. Translation: stop talking before this spreads further. One of the Harrington Vale coordinators, Olivia, spoke up quietly. Are we under investigation too? Martin gave the kind of lawyer answer that sounds reassuring while saying absolutely nothing. At this stage, we are simply preserving information. Preserve information, which usually means somebody's preparing for court. My phone buzzed under the table. Unknown number again. Check Daniel's approved leave forms. My pulse kicked immediately. I glanced around the room. Nobody noticed. Another message followed almost instantly. Ask why HR approved emergency leave without documentation. Then nothing. I stared at the screen. My mind immediately jumped to Paula sitting 3 seats away, pretending everything was controlled. She looked exhausted today. Makeup rushed. Jaw tight. Hands clasped too carefully together. Suddenly, she didn't look like a confident HR director anymore. She looked trapped. Martin started assigning document preservation tasks. But honestly, I barely heard him. Because now my brain had locked onto one question. Why had HR approved everything so quickly? Emergency leave at Bellwether was never simple. I knew that firsthand. 3 years earlier, when my father had surgery, HR made me submit medical letters, timelines, emergency contact information, even proof of travel before approving 2 weeks off. But Daniel, senior director, vanishes overnight, claims terminal cancer in the family, relocates internationally indefinitely, and somehow paperwork appears instantly? No delays, no verification, no resistance. Either Daniel was unbelievably persuasive, or someone wanted the process rushed through without scrutiny. Meeting ended around 9:30. The second people started standing. Marcus pulled me aside. Walk with me. Great. We moved toward his office while everyone else pretended not to watch. Once inside, he shut the door immediately. What exactly have you been discussing with Ravi? There it was. Straight to it. Operational files. Don't play games with me. Ethan. His voice dropped lower. IT logs were accessed yesterday under your request. Because client strategy files disappeared. That wasn't your authority. Apparently nobody else was checking. His expression hardened. You need to understand something. Legal exposure here is massive. If confidential material moved externally, everyone connected to Harrington Vale workflows will be reviewed. There it was again. The subtle threat. Not direct enough to quote later. Just enough pressure to make me nervous. Are you saying I'm under suspicion? I'm saying everybody is. Bullshit. He was already preparing escape routes. I could see it happening in real time. Executives never wait for disaster. They start quietly redistributing blame before the explosion fully arrives. Did HR verify Daniel's family emergency? I asked suddenly. Marcus blinked. Tiny hesitation. That's not relevant. It's very relevant. Ethan, did anyone verify it? He rubbed his forehead aggressively now. We received documentation. That surprised me. What documentation? Medical forms. From Singapore? Yes. My stomach twisted. Because somehow that made it worse. Either Daniel had forged documents, or somebody had helped him. Marcus lowered his voice. Listen carefully. I know emotions are running high, but you need to stop chasing theories. Focus on your actual responsibilities. Actual responsibilities. God, I hated that phrase. It was always used right before somebody tried to bury a problem under hierarchy. My actual responsibilities include protecting client transitions. I said evenly. And right now it looks like confidential strategy was removed before Daniel left. Marcus stared at me for a long second. You always were smart, he said quietly. Smart enough to know when something is above your level. That sentence chilled me more than if he had shouted. Because underneath it was something clear. Stop digging. Same message as the anonymous texts. Different wording. I left his office with adrenaline buzzing under my skin. Maya immediately looked up from her desk when I returned. You okay? No, what happened? I lowered my voice. Marcus knows I checked the logs. Is that bad? Probably. Before she could answer, another email notification hit everyone's inbox simultaneously. Subject line, mandatory systems audit. The message instructed all employees connected to Harrington Vale to surrender devices for forensic review by end of day. Around the office, people started reacting immediately. What the hell? Forensic review? Are they serious? Panic spread fast because suddenly this wasn't gossip anymore. It was official. Devices. Audits. Legal. People started worrying about themselves instantly. Not just the company. Themselves. I opened the email twice. Then a third time. Standard language. Broad scope. But one sentence stood out immediately. Failure to cooperate may result in disciplinary action. There it was. Fear. The oldest management tool in existence. Ravi messaged me privately 2 minutes later. They're locking down server permissions. Another message. Marcus personally requested user export histories. My chest tightened. They were looking for scapegoats already. Around lunchtime, things escalated further. Someone leaked the story externally. Nobody knew who. But suddenly finance blogs started posting articles about internal turmoil at Bellwether. Then LinkedIn started exploding. Former employees commenting vaguely about toxic culture. Anonymous posts appearing on Reddit about unethical client practices. One post mentioned Daniel directly. Senior director lied about family tragedy to join competitor while leadership looked the other way. That one spread fast. By 1 o'clock, half the office had seen it. Nobody worked anymore. They just refreshed feeds and whispered. Maya sat beside me in the break room staring at her untouched sandwich. Do you think Daniel posted that himself? No, then who? I thought about the anonymous number again. Someone who wants this public. She looked exhausted already. I don't understand any of this. Neither do I. But that wasn't fully true anymore. Patterns were starting to emerge. Ugly patterns. Bellwether leadership knew Daniel was considering leaving. HR approved emergency leave unusually fast. Confidential files vanished before departure. Legal now seemed more focused on containment than truth. And somebody inside the company was leaking information externally on purpose. Which meant there were factions now. People protecting the company. People exposing it. People trying to survive somewhere in the middle. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Check Paula's approval timestamp. I stared at the message hard, then immediately walked to Ravi's desk. He looked up nervously. You need to stop appearing near me, he muttered. I need one thing. No, Ravi. Ethan. Legal already asked for access logs. They're monitoring everything. Just tell me this. When was Daniel's leave approved? Ravi hesitated. Why? Please. He sighed heavily and opened something on his screen. Fast typing. Quick searching. Then his face changed slightly. That's weird. What? Approval timestamp. What about it? He turned the screen slightly toward me. Daniel's leave was approved before HR officially received the medical documentation. I felt cold instantly. How much before? Almost 11 hours. 11 hours. Meaning the leave approval happened first. Documentation came later. That wasn't procedure. That wasn't even close to procedure. Can you see who approved it? Ravi swallowed. Paula initiated. Marcus signed final authorization. Of course he did. And the documents? Uploaded manually afterward. My mind raced immediately. By who? Ravi clicked again, then looked at me carefully. Not Daniel. Who? He lowered his voice. Paula. Jesus Christ. We stared at each other in silence for a second. Then Ravi whispered. Ethan, this is bad. No kidding. Because now the story changed completely. This wasn't HR being fooled. This was HR actively constructing the leave process after approval already happened. Maybe because Daniel promised documentation later. Maybe because leadership wanted him gone quietly. Or maybe because everybody involved believed they could control the narrative long enough to survive it. My phone rang suddenly, making both of us jump. Unknown number again. I answered immediately this time. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a woman's voice. Stop checking system logs at work. I froze. Who is this? You need to listen carefully. Her voice sounded tense. Controlled. Marcus is preparing to claim Daniel acted alone. Legal wants internal negligence minimized. How do you know that? Because I used to work in compliance. Compliance. Another former employee. Who are you? Doesn't matter. It does if you keep contacting me. A pause. Daniel wasn't supposed to disappear like that. Every nerve in my body sharpened. What does that mean? The original plan was quiet resignation after transition. But North Star accelerated the offer timeline. Daniel panicked. Marcus panicked. Everything became rushed. You're saying leadership knew he was leaving to a competitor? Yes. And they still let him keep full access to Harrington Vale. Ethan, she said softly. Bellwether has been leaking talent and strategy for years. This isn't new. It's just the first time someone used a dying relative as cover. My stomach turned. Why tell me this? Because they're going to bury lower-level staff if this turns legal. Including me? Especially you. You touched operational delivery. You're visible enough to blame, but not senior enough to protect yourself. I leaned against Ravi's desk slowly because suddenly my legs felt weak. What should I do? Save everything. Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone while office noise continued around us like normal life still existed. Ravi looked nervous now. What? Nothing good. By 3 o'clock, Bellwether officially started collapsing internally. Harrington Vale suspended all transition activities. 2 more clients requested emergency review meetings. Finance teams started quietly discussing layoffs. Somebody from executive leadership was reportedly screaming in one of the upstairs conference rooms loud enough for half the floor to hear. And through all of it, Marcus kept walking around pretending control still existed. That almost impressed me honestly. The commitment to denial. Around 4, Paula approached my desk personally. Can we speak privately? Maya immediately looked terrified beside me. I followed Paula into a small HR meeting room where she closed the door softly. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she sat down heavily. You've been asking questions. Straight to it. Yes. You need to stop. That's becoming a popular sentence today. She ignored that. Ethan, this situation is legally sensitive. Did you forge Daniel's leave process? Her face tightened instantly. Be careful. That's not a no. We were handling a complex executive matter. You approved leave before receiving documentation. Silence. Why? Paula looked exhausted now. Truly exhausted. Because Marcus insisted the matter was urgent. And you just accepted that? You think HR has power in companies like this? She snapped suddenly. That surprised me. Marcus told me Daniel was having a mental health crisis. She continued quietly. He said immediate leave was necessary before a breakdown affected Harrington Vale negotiations. But the cancer story? She looked away. That came later. My heartbeat sped up. Who created it? Another silence. Too long. Paula, I can't answer that. Which was answer enough. Oh my God. You knew people believed his sister was dying. I know. And you said nothing. Her voice cracked slightly then. Do you think I had control anymore? Marcus wanted sympathy around the departure because clients were already nervous about Daniel leaving. I stared at her in disbelief. So you built a tragedy to protect the transition? It wasn't supposed to spread this far. But lies always spread further than planned. Especially emotional ones. Paula rubbed her eyes. Ethan, listen to me. Legal needs this contained at executive level. If operational employees start discussing internal details externally, you mean telling the truth? I mean protecting yourself. There it was again. Fear disguised as advice. They'll sacrifice whoever they need to, she said quietly. That's what happens when firms panic. I looked at her differently then. Not innocent. Definitely not innocent. But maybe not fully in control either. Just another person who compromised one step at a time until suddenly she was helping fake terminal illness paperwork for corporate optics. God, imagine ending up there. I stood slowly. I'm not taking the fall for this. Paula looked genuinely sad for the first time. Then be smarter than the others. When I left HR, my work laptop immediately displayed a security lock notification. Device access restricted pending audit review. My access permissions had changed. That fast. I looked around the office. 2 other people were already arguing with IT near the support desk. The lockdown had started. Bellwether was eating itself alive now. And somewhere inside all that panic, one thought kept growing louder in my head. Daniel may have started the fire. But the company had soaked itself in gasoline years before he lit the match. By Friday morning, Bellwether no longer felt like a company. It felt like the final hour before evacuation. Nobody trusted anyone. People stopped speaking openly unless they were outside. Alone. Phones turned face down on cafe tables. Entire departments suddenly became unavailable pending review. HR stopped smiling altogether. Even the interns looked traumatized, whispering to each other near elevators like they had accidentally joined a criminal organization instead of a consulting firm. My access still hadn't been restored. Every time I tried opening a shared drive, another security warning appeared. Restricted. Pending review. Contact administrator. It was funny in a dark way. 10 years of spotless performance reviews. Endless overtime. Salvaging impossible client disasters. And suddenly one executive scandal happened and the company treated everybody like potential thieves. Around 9:30, Maya rushed toward my desk holding her phone so tightly her knuckles looked white. Ethan. Her voice cracked. Marcus resigned. I stood up immediately. What? Effective immediately. She shoved the screen toward me. Internal announcement. Following recent developments and in the interest of preserving organizational stability, Marcus Hale has stepped down as managing partner of Bellwether and Company. Stability. Another word corporations use when everything is burning down. I kept reading. An interim leadership committee has been established pending external investigation and operational review. External investigation. So it was official now. Legal wasn't just circling internally anymore. Someone outside the company had gotten involved. Maya looked pale. Do you think he was fired? Probably forced out before the board could publicly blame him. She sat on the edge of my desk. This is insane. No, the insane part had happened long before this. The insane part was how many people quietly participated in the lie because protecting revenue mattered more than basic morality. This was just the collapse afterward. My phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Board meeting at noon. They're preparing separation packages for operational staff. My stomach tightened immediately. Including me? No reply. Of course not. I looked around the office again. People pretending to work. People quietly updating LinkedIn profiles between meetings. People deleting messages. People suddenly remembering they had concerns, all along now that leadership protection was disappearing. Bellwether had entered survival mode. And survival mode makes people ugly fast. At 11, Paula appeared beside my desk. She looked worse today. Exhausted. Hollow-eyed. Like somebody who hadn't slept in days. Can we talk? She asked quietly. I almost said no. But something about her expression stopped me. We went downstairs to a small and used meeting room near reception. She closed the door softly and sat across from me without speaking for several seconds. Then finally, Marcus is gone. I know. Legal's preparing for regulatory review. I know that too. She nodded weakly. Ethan, they're building timelines. Meaning they're trying to determine who knew what and when. And her eyes met mine carefully. Your name keeps appearing. There it was. Finally. Directly. Because I managed Harrington Vale operations. Yes. And because I questioned leadership. Silence. That silence told me everything. Unbelievable. I'm trying to help you. I laughed once. Short. Cold. You helped fake medical documentation for a fictional dying sister. She flinched hard at that. Good. She wasn't fictional. Paula whispered. The illness was exaggerated. But she exists. That honestly doesn't make it better. She rubbed her forehead. You need to understand how quickly everything escalated. Daniel wanted immediate leave. Marcus was terrified of losing Harrington Vale before quarter close. They kept saying it would just be temporary until North Star negotiations settled. Negotiations. Yes. I stared at her. Marcus knew about the North Star offer before Daniel left. Another silence. Yes. There it was. Full confirmation. How long? About 3 weeks. Jesus Christ. And they still gave him unrestricted access to confidential strategy? Paula looked miserable now. Marcus thought Daniel could be convinced to stay. So instead of protecting the company, he tried negotiating privately while Daniel kept downloading files. Ethan, no. Don't Ethan me. My anger finally surfaced fully then because suddenly I could see the whole thing clearly. Daniel wasn't some mastermind criminal. Marcus wasn't some tragic executive overwhelmed by circumstances. They were both arrogant men who thought rules existed for other people. Daniel thought he could manipulate sympathy and disappear cleanly. Marcus thought he could quietly manage the situation behind closed doors and preserve client revenue. And everyone underneath them got crushed when their egos collided. Paula looked close to tears now. I never thought it would become this. That's the problem. I said quietly. None of you thought beyond the next quarter. We sat there in silence for a few seconds. Then Paula reached into her bag and slid a flash drive across the table toward me. I stared at it. What's this? Copies of approval correspondence. My pulse immediately sped up. Why are you giving me this? Because legal is going to protect executives first. And you? She smiled weakly. I'm not an executive. I'm just useful until panic starts. God. That sentence hit harder than I expected because it was true for almost everyone in companies like Bellwether. Useful until panic starts. Then expendable. I picked up the drive slowly. What's on it? Emails. Timeline approvals. Internal discussions. Including Marcus? Yes. Including Daniel? Some. Why? She looked down at the table for a long moment before answering. Because I don't want to be the only person destroyed for this. Honest at last. I slipped the drive into my bag carefully. You should probably get a lawyer. Already did. Smart woman. At noon, the board meeting started upstairs. Everyone knew because executive assistants suddenly stopped moving around and security appeared near conference areas pretending not to monitor people. The atmosphere downstairs became unbearable. Nobody focused anymore. Half the company just refreshed Slack channels waiting for news. Then the layoff started. Quietly at first. Individual calendar invites appearing one by one. Organizational review discussion. The corporate version of a firing squad. Maya got one at 12:43. She stared at the notification like it physically hurt her. Ethan, go. Breathe. Don't sign anything immediately. She nodded nervously and disappeared upstairs. Ravi got called 20 minutes later. Then finance people. Then 2 project coordinators from operations. Bellwether was bleeding itself out publicly now. Around 2. I got my own invitation. Subject line, immediate review meeting. Of course. I walked upstairs strangely calm. Maybe because by then I already knew how this worked. Once institutions panic, truth becomes secondary. The only thing that matters is reducing damage. Inside the conference room sat 2 external lawyers and a board representative I'd only seen twice before. No Marcus. No Paula. One lawyer gestured politely. Please sit. The board representative folded her hands carefully. Ethan, thank you for meeting with us. Corporate funeral voice. We're conducting an ongoing review into operational failures connected to Harrington Vale and former employee Daniel Lim. I'm aware. Your name has appeared frequently in project oversight documentation. Because I managed implementation. Yes. She exchanged a glance with the lawyer. We also understand you accessed restricted IT audit information without authorization. There it was. I almost smiled. I asked IT to locate missing client strategy files after Northstar presented overlapping material. That decision exceeded your authority. Apparently leadership wasn't handling it. One lawyer jumped in quickly. We're not assigning blame at this stage. Lie. However, he continued, certain procedural violations occurred during the transition period. Procedural violations? Unauthorized access reviews. Potential mishandling of internal information. External discussion of confidential matters. Oh, there it was. They wanted me scared. They wanted me uncertain enough to accept quiet removal before lawyers got involved publicly. I leaned back slightly. Are you accusing me of leaking information? We're reviewing all possibilities. Interesting. The board representative's tone sharpened. Ethan, cooperation here would be in everyone's best interest. Then let's cooperate honestly. Silence. Marcus knew Daniel was negotiating with Northstar before emergency leave approval. Nobody moved. HR approved leave before receiving documentation. Still silence. Leadership allowed Daniel continued strategic access during active competitor negotiations. One lawyer interrupted immediately. Where did you obtain that information? I looked directly at him. Internal records. Tension snapped tight across the room instantly. Ethan, the board representative said carefully. Possession of unauthorized documentation could create significant legal complications. I almost laughed again. Amazing how quickly concern shifts once accountability points upward instead of downward. So can fake terminal illness stories. I said calmly. Nobody spoke. I reached into my bag slowly, then placed the flash drive Paula gave me onto the table. I think your legal team should review that. The reaction was immediate. Real. Tiny changes in posture. Eye contact. Sudden alertness. Because they knew. Whatever was on that drive mattered. One lawyer picked it up carefully. What exactly is this? Approval correspondence. The board representative looked genuinely uneasy now. Good. For the first time since this nightmare started. The fear had moved upward instead of downward. Meeting ended 15 minutes later with no threats anymore. Just careful professionalism. They told me not to discuss the matter externally. I told them I'd consider it. Then I walked out feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Because finally I understood something important. They were scared too. Maybe more scared than us. By late afternoon, the entire office knew something massive had shifted upstairs. Legal teams were suddenly moving fast between rooms. Executives stopped making eye contact with staff. 2 board members arrived in person. Someone said Marcus had hired private counsel already. Another rumor claimed Northstar was preparing legal defense statements. Daniel still hadn't spoken publicly. But honestly, he didn't need to anymore. The damage already existed. The lie had outgrown him. Maya returned around for looking stunned. They offered me severance. You taking it? I think so. She sat beside me quietly. Ethan, did we waste years here? That question hurt more than I expected. Because I honestly didn't know. We had worked hard. We had cared. We had built real relationships with clients and teams and each other. But all of it happened inside a structure that ultimately viewed people as movable risk categories. Useful until inconvenient. No, I said eventually. I think they wasted us. She looked like she might cry again. I really believe Daniel was a good person. Maybe parts of him were. Do you believe that? I thought about his phone call. The calm rationalizations. The arrogance. The panic underneath it. I think people can become dangerous once they start believing their own excuses. That felt true. Around 6. My phone rang again. Daniel. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Things seem lively over there, he said quietly. Same calm voice. But thinner now somehow. Strained. Marcus resigned. I heard. Did Northstar hear too? A pause. Ethan, no really. I'm curious. Was all this worth it? Silence stretched between us. Then finally. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. There it was again. Nobody ever intends the explosion. They only intend the shortcut before it. Your sister, I said quietly. Does she know? His breathing shifted slightly. No good. Don't do that. Do what? Turn this into something simple. It wasn't. I walked toward the office windows overlooking the city. Most desks were empty now. Half the lights already off. Bellwether physically looked smaller somehow. Like the illusion of importance had drained out of it. You know the worst part? I asked. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. I looked down at the street far below. The worst part isn't even the stolen files anymore. It's that people genuinely cared about you. He didn't answer. Maya cried for you. Silence. People donated money for flowers. More silence. And you let them. Finally he spoke again. Voice quieter now. I know. And weirdly, that sounded like the first honest thing he'd said to me in weeks. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. Good. But Bellwether was already rotten. I know. Marcus would have sacrificed anyone to protect the account. I know that too. Then why are you angry at me and not him? I thought about that carefully. Because Marcus being morally empty was never surprising. That landed. I could tell. We stayed silent for a second. Then Daniel asked softly, what happens now? I looked around the dying office one last time. Honestly, yeah. I think the company survives. Smaller. Weaker. Different leadership. Lots of legal paperwork. Public apologies. Corporate cleansing rituals. A tired laugh escaped him. Probably. But the trust is gone. Another silence. Then quietly. And us? I almost smiled at that because even now he still framed things like negotiations. Like relationships were strategic categories that could maybe still be managed carefully. There was never an US. Daniel. I said softly. That was the problem. Then I hung up. My last day at Bellwether happened 3 weeks later. Technically I resigned. Realistically, we all understood the company needed certain people gone before regulators finished reviewing everything. Paula resigned too. Ravi left for another tech firm. Maya moved to a smaller consultancy and immediately seemed happier. Marcus disappeared completely from public view after several ugly industry articles surfaced about leadership misconduct and governance failures. Daniel stayed at Northstar. Though rumors followed him everywhere after the story leaked fully online. And it did leak eventually. Of course it did. The fake emergency leave. The manipulated approvals. The internal cover-up attempts. Anonymous employees posted timelines. Journalists connected dots. Former staff started sharing experiences publicly. By the end, the story wasn't even really about Daniel anymore. It became about how easy it is for powerful people inside companies to rewrite reality when everyone else is too exhausted or scared to challenge them. 6 months later, I met Maya for drinks near the river after work. Real work. Better work. Work where nobody called midnight emergencies growth opportunities. We sat outside watching people move through the city while autumn wind curled around the tables. Do you ever miss Bellwether? She asked suddenly. I thought about it honestly. The chaos. The adrenaline. The late nights. The strange loyalty you develop surviving impossible situations beside other exhausted people. Sometimes. I admitted. But I think I missed the version of it we thought existed. She nodded slowly. Yeah. We sat quietly for a moment. Then she laughed softly into her drink. You know what still kills me? What? That stupid cake. I laughed harder than I had in months. Because somehow that cheap little cake had become the perfect symbol for the entire disaster. Corporate sympathy built on complete fiction. Thinking of you, Daniel, she said, shaking her head. Meanwhile, he was probably onboarding at North Star. Probably eating catered sushi during orientation. We both laughed again. Then eventually the laughter faded and the city noise returned around us. Maya looked out toward the water quietly. Do you think people like that ever regret it? I thought about Daniel for a long time before answering. I think they regret the consequences. I said finally, but I don't know if that's the same thing. And honestly, that was enough for me. Because in the end, Bellwether collapsed exactly the way most toxic workplaces do. Not through one dramatic betrayal. Not through one evil person. But through years of small compromises made by people convinced they were smarter than accountability. Daniel just happened to be the first crack everyone could finally see.